Han Dohan stood at the smallest podium in the Grand Chamber. It had always been the smallest. When humanity joined the Galactic Council 40 years ago, they were given a seat in the back corner, a narrow desk, and a microphone that occasionally cut out during important votes. No one ever fixed it. Dohan never complained. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with gray at his temples, and a calm face that revealed nothing. He had served as Earth's ambassador for 11 years, and in that time, he had learned one important truth about the galaxy. It did not matter how much you gave. It only mattered how old your species was, and humanity was young, the youngest ever admitted to the Council. Today, Dohan was presenting a simple proposal. A joint disaster relief plan. Nothing controversial. Nothing expensive. Humans had been running informal emergency responses across Council space for years already. They were the ones who showed up first when a colony lost power or a plague hit a frontier station. All Dohan wanted was to make it official so that the response could be faster and better organized. He was halfway through his second sentence when Grand Arbiter Volmek raised one of his 6 hands. "Ambassador," Volmek said in his deep, wet voice, "I believe we have heard enough." Dohan stopped speaking. The chamber went quiet. Volmek was an enormous amphibian creature with pale blue skin and 6 golden eyes that blinked slowly, one pair at a time. He had led the council for over 300 years, and when he spoke, everyone listened. "It is admirable that your species wishes to contribute," Volmek continued. "Truly. But perhaps it would be wise for younger civilizations to spend more time learning and less time proposing. You have been among us for only 40 of your short years. Many of us have been here for thousands." A low ripple of laughter moved through the chamber. Not from everyone, but from enough. Dohan stood still. His face did not change. Then Councillor Theska spoke. She was a tall insectoid being with sharp black eyes and clicking mandibles. She represented the Pelori hegemony, one of the oldest and wealthiest members of the council. "Let us be honest," Theska said, tilting her angular head. "Humans have been adequate workers, good with their hands, useful in simple tasks, but we should not confuse being useful with being important. A tool does not sit at the table with those who use it." More laughter, louder this time. Dohan waited until the chamber was quiet again. Then he asked, in the same calm voice he always used, "Will the proposal be reviewed by the appropriate committee?" Volmek waved a hand. "Noted and archived," he said. Every ambassador in the room knew what it meant. It meant the proposal would be placed in a file that no one would ever open. It meant no. It meant sit down and be quiet. He gave a small nod, picked up his datapad, and walked back to his seat. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. And because of that, most of the beings in the room forgot about him before he even sat down. But what none of them knew was that this was not the first time. It was not the 10th time. It was not even the 50th time. Over the past decade, humans had been slowly and systematically pushed to the edges of the council. They were removed from trade committees, denied access to scientific databases that other new species received freely. Their military sacrifices during the border wars, where human soldiers bled and died defending council territory, had been officially credited to other species in the historical record. Every time, Dohan had filed formal complaints. Every time, the complaints were noted and archived. Back in the human delegation's quarters, a small set of rooms on one of the lower levels of Aethys Prime, Son Unji was waiting. She was 29 years old, sharp and serious, with dark eyes that burned when she was angry. Right now, they were burning. "I watched the session," she said, as Dohan walked in. "That was beyond disrespectful. We should file a formal protest with the Ethics Subcommittee. We should demand a public session to address the pattern of discrimination against our delegation. We should—" Draft the withdrawal, Do-hun said quietly. Eun-ji stopped. The words hung in the air between them. She knew what the withdrawal was. Every human diplomat knew. It was called Condition Evergreen, a plan written 15 years ago and updated every single year. It was the complete removal of every human being, every human ship, every piece of human technology, and every human-built system from all non-human space. It had never been used. It had never even been discussed outside of the highest levels of Earth's government. Ambassador, Yoon-ji said slowly, are you sure? Do-hun did not look at her. He was standing at the viewport, looking out at the stars. Aethys Prime orbited a binary star system, and the light from the two suns painted everything in shades of gold and white. Contact Admiral Yoon Nari, he said. Contact Chief Engineer Baek Jin-ho. Use encrypted channels only. Human channels. No alien relays. Do-hun, Yoon-ji said, dropping the title, because the moment felt too heavy for formality. If we do this, there is no going back. They will not understand. No, Do-hun agreed. They will not. That is the point. He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time in 11 years, she saw something behind his calm expression. It was not anger. It was sadness. Deep, tired sadness. They made their feelings clear a long time ago, Eun-ji. We were just too patient to listen, too hopeful. We kept thinking that if we worked harder, helped more, sacrificed more, they would see us as equals. He paused. They will not. So we will leave. And we will do it the way we do everything. Quietly, completely, and with dignity. Eun-ji sat down at her console. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. She felt the weight of what she was about to begin. One message to the Admiral. One message to the Chief Engineer. 2 messages that would change the galaxy. She placed her fingers on the keys, took one breath, and started typing. Outside the viewport, the twin suns burned on, indifferent and golden, as the youngest species in the Galactic Council began the quiet work of saying goodbye. Admiral Yoon Nari read the message once, sitting alone in her quarters aboard the UEN flagship Baekdu. The message was short, just 2 words and an authorization code. She read it, deleted it, and sat still for exactly 10 seconds. Then she stood up, straightened her uniform, and walked to the bridge. Her crew looked up when she entered. They knew her face. They had served under her for years, through border skirmishes and pirate hunts and long silent patrols in empty space. They knew that when Admiral Yoon looked like this, with her jaw set and her eyes sharp and flat, something serious was happening. Open a fleet-wide channel, she said. All ships, all sectors, encrypted. The communications officer obeyed without question. Nari leaned forward and spoke calmly into the microphone. This is Admiral Yoon Nari, United Earth Navy, authorization code Evergreen 7. All commands are to begin Condition Evergreen immediately. No exceptions, no delays. Acknowledge and execute. She closed the channel. Around her, the bridge crew was silent. A few of them looked at each other. They all knew what Condition Evergreen meant. They had trained for it. They just never thought they would actually hear the order. Nari turned to her first officer, a steady man named Park Tae-ho, and said, "Get me a status report from every sector within 6 hours. And Tae-ho, make sure every ship knows the rules. We leave nothing broken. We leave nothing behind that is ours. And we do not explain ourselves to anyone." Tae-ho nodded. "Yes, Admiral." Across the galaxy, the machinery of withdrawal began to turn. Chief Engineer Baek Jin-ho received his own message 12 minutes after Nari received hers. He was on a deep space logistics station called Relay 9, a place he had personally designed and built 17 years ago. Relay 9 was one of 412 stations in the human-maintained navigation network, a web of signal buoys, data relays, and emergency beacons that stretched across Council space like a nervous system. Most species in the galaxy did not know that humans had built this network. It had been assembled slowly, over decades, with no ceremony and no contracts. Humans just noticed that ships were getting lost, that communications were unreliable in border sectors, that emergency signals were going unanswered because no one could hear them. So they built the relays. They asked no one for permission. They asked no one for payment. Now Jinho was going to take it all back. He gathered his team, about 40 engineers and technicians, in the main operations room of Relay 9. They were men and women of different ages, all tired, all far from home. He told them what was happening. Some of them looked relieved. A young technician named Oh Mireille wiped her eyes quickly and then raised her hand. "Do we shut everything down at once?" she asked. "No," Jinho said. "We do it properly. Every station gets a clean shutdown. Power cells set to safe mode. Data wiped according to protocol. Physical hardware packed and loaded for transport. Nothing is sabotaged. Nothing is left to fail dangerously. When we leave, everything will simply be off. They can build their own systems if they want to. But ours come home with us." "What if they ask us to stay?" another engineer asked. Jinho looked at him for a long moment. "No one has ever asked us to stay," he said quietly. "No one has ever asked us anything at all. They just assumed we would always be there." The work began. Across Council space, human teams moved with the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of practice. They did not rush. They did not panic. They packed their tools, powered down their stations, uploaded final maintenance logs that no one would probably ever read, and boarded their ships. On frontier worlds, human doctors finished treating their last patients. They handed over medical files, carefully translated into local languages. They showed alien staff how to operate the equipment that was too large to move. They said goodbye to patients who did not understand why they were leaving. A doctor named Quan Hana, who had served for 9 years on a small colony at the edge of Pelori space, held the hand of an elderly alien woman who was recovering from surgery. The woman clicked her mandibles softly, which was the Pelori way of saying thank you. Hana smiled, squeezed her hand, and walked away without looking back, because she knew that if she looked back, she would not be able to leave. On mixed species stations, human families quietly packed their apartments. Children asked why they were moving. Parents said they were going home. Human teachers at alien academies submitted resignation letters that were polite and short and gave no reasons. Human peacekeeping troops on disputed borders completed their final patrols and did not send replacements. The species they had been protecting did not notice for 3 days. No announcements were made, no press conferences, no angry open letters, no threats. Humans simply stopped showing up. It took the Council 12 days to notice. Councillor Rimal, the crystalline being who represented the Alun Collective, was the first to raise the issue. He had always been quiet, a watcher more than a speaker. But he had watched humans carefully for years, and he respected them in a way he had never said out loud. "The human delegation has been absent for 6 consecutive sessions," Rimal said during a routine council meeting. "Their offices on Aethys Prime appeared to be empty." "Has anyone spoken with Ambassador Han?" Grand Arbiter Volmek barely glanced up from his notes. "Perhaps they are sulking," he said. "Young species are emotional. They will return when they realize that isolation does not suit them." A few counselors chuckled. Rimal did not. He looked at the empty human seats in the back corner of the chamber, the small podium with the microphone that never worked properly, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. On the 29th day, the last human ship left Aethys Prime. It was a small cargo shuttle, not a warship. Son Unji was aboard, along with the personal effects of the entire human delegation. Datapads, photographs, a small potted plant that Do-hun had kept on his desk for 11 years. Unji sat by the viewport and watched Aethys Prime shrink behind them. The great station world glittered in the light of its twin suns, vast and ancient and full of beings who had never once said thank you. She whispered to no one in particular, "You could have just been kind." The shuttle jumped to faster than light speed, and the stars stretched into long white lines, and then there was nothing behind them but darkness and silence. Humanity was gone, and the galaxy did not yet understand what it had lost. But it would. Very soon, it would. The first thing to fail was the navigation network. It did not fail all at once. It failed the way a candle goes out, slowly at first, and then all at once. The human-built relay buoys had been designed to run independently for about 60 days on their internal power cells. After that, they needed maintenance. No one came to maintain them. One by one, sector by sector, the buoys went dark. Ship captains who had relied on those signals for years suddenly found themselves flying through regions of space with no guidance. Routes that used to take 3 days now took 8, because ships had to navigate manually, using older and less accurate star charts. Trade convoys that moved like clockwork began arriving late. Then some of them stopped arriving at all. Within the first month, shipping costs across Council space rose by 15%. By the second month, they had nearly doubled. The galactic economy, which had been stable for centuries, began to shake like a table with one leg removed. The Pelori hegemony was the first to truly suffer. Their agricultural worlds produced enormous quantities of food that they exported across the galaxy. But the food was perishable, and the entire cold chain logistics system that kept it fresh during transport had been designed and maintained by humans. Baek Jinho himself had built the original version of that system 20 years ago as a personal project, because he had visited a Pelori colony and seen good food rotting in warehouses while people on nearby stations went hungry. Now, without human technicians to keep the system running, shipments began to spoil mid-transit. 3 Pelori colony worlds reported food shortages within 60 days. The shortages were not yet deadly, but they were frightening, and frightened populations are not patient populations. Riots broke out on 2 of the 3 worlds. Councillor Theska, who had called humans tools that did not belong at the table, stood before the council and demanded action. Her voice was sharp and angry, her mandibles clicking with every word. "The humans have sabotaged our infrastructure," she said. "This is an act of economic warfare. The council must respond with force." Rimmel spoke from his seat. His voice was calm, the way crystal sounds when it rings. "The humans did not sabotage anything, Counselor. They built those systems with their own resources. They maintained them with their own people. They took back what belonged to them. That is not sabotage. That is simply leaving." Theska turned on him, furious. Then they should be compelled to return and restore what they removed. "On what grounds?" Rimmel asked. "We told them they were servants. We told them they were tools. Are you now saying that we cannot function without our tools?" Theska had no answer for that. She sat down, and the chamber was very quiet for a long time. The border regions collapsed next. For over a decade, human peacekeeping forces had been stationed on disputed boundaries between minor species. These were not glamorous assignments. They were long, boring, and occasionally dangerous. The humans who served there did so because someone had to, and no one else volunteered. They learned local customs, mediated disputes, and kept small conflicts from becoming large wars. They were good at it because they genuinely cared, and the local populations trusted them. When the humans left, the trust left with them. Old grievances resurfaced within weeks. 2 species called the Vorath and the Kenai, who had shared a disputed star system peacefully for 10 years under human mediation, went to war within a month of the last human peacekeeper's departure. The fighting was brutal and fast. The Council sent Dreth military forces to restore order, but the Dreth were soldiers, not mediators. They understood how to end fights, but not how to prevent them. Their heavy-handed approach only made things worse, and within 3 months, what had been one small conflict had spread to 4 neighboring systems. The medical crises were the quietest disaster, and in many ways, the worst. Human doctors and nurses had been operating clinics on dozens of remote stations and frontier worlds. These were places too small or too poor to attract medical professionals from larger species. The humans came anyway. They treated diseases they had never encountered before. They learned alien biology from scratch. They stayed for years, sometimes decades, in places far from home, because there were patients who needed them. When they left, those patients had no one. Mortality rates on frontier stations rose sharply. A respiratory illness that human doctors had been managing on a small mining colony killed 47 beings in 2 weeks because no one knew how to operate the treatment equipment. The equipment was still there. The humans had left it behind. But without the knowledge and the care that came with it, the machines were just metal and glass. And then the translation system began to break down. This was perhaps the most far-reaching failure of all. Humans had built the universal real-time translation matrix that nearly every species in Council space relied on for daily communication. It was an enormously complex system, constantly updated to account for new dialects, cultural shifts, and linguistic evolution. Without human engineers maintaining it, errors crept in. Small ones at first. A wrong word here, an awkward phrase there. A trade negotiation between the Alun Collective and a minor federation fell apart because the system translated mutual benefit as something closer to "I claim dominance over you." A diplomatic message from Volmec himself was mistranslated so badly that the receiving species interpreted it as a declaration of war. It took 4 days and a personal visit from Rimal to calm the situation. War Chief Graxon, the military commander of the Dreth forces, had heard enough. He stood before the council, massive and armored, and proposed the solution that military minds always propose. "We go to the Sol system," he said. "We take a fleet. We tell the humans that their absence is unacceptable and that they will return to their duties immediately. If they refuse, we compel them." Volmec did not respond right away. He sat in his great chair and blinked his 6 golden eyes slowly. He was thinking about something he had tried very hard not to think about for many years. He was thinking about the Battle of the Pale Corridor. During the border wars, a pirate armada of over 200 ships had attacked a civilian shipping lane. The Council sent a response fleet, but it arrived too late. The only force in range was a small human patrol group, 12 ships. Admiral Yunari, who was a captain then, took those 12 ships into the corridor and fought the armada for 9 hours until reinforcements arrived. She lost 4 ships. She destroyed 61 enemy vessels. She saved 11,000 civilian lives. The Council had officially credited the victory to the Dreth fleet that arrived at the end. Volmec looked at Graxon and said very quietly, "No, we will not be sending a fleet to Earth." Graxon stared at him. "You are afraid of them?" "I am not a fool," Volmec said, "and I will not add a military humiliation to the list of disasters we are already facing." The session ended in silence. But as the other councillors filed out, Rimal remained. He stood and addressed the empty chamber, his crystalline body catching the light. "We did not lose a servant," he said, and his voice echoed off the ancient walls. "We drove away a partner, and we do not even possess the dignity to admit it." No one heard him, or perhaps no one wanted to, but the words hung in the air like a verdict, true and heavy and impossible to ignore. That night, Volmec sat alone in the Grand Chamber for the first time in 300 years. The room was dark, except for the light of distant stars through the great viewport. He stared at the empty human seats in the back corner, at the small podium with the broken microphone, and he felt something that he had not felt in a very long time. He felt afraid. But of the silence they had left behind. 8 months after the last human ship left Aethys Prime, the Galactic Council convened an emergency summit. In 2,000 years of its existence, the Council had called emergency summits for asteroid impacts, for plagues, for wars that threatened to consume entire sectors. It had never called one to address its own failure. Until now. The Grand Chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Representatives from over 300 species sat in tense silence as Grand Arbiter Volmec rose to speak. He moved slowly, and those who had known him for centuries noticed that he looked different. Older, smaller somehow. His 6 golden eyes did not shine the way they used to. "This summit has been called," Volmec began, and his voice was heavy, "to address the cascading consequences of the human withdrawal from Council space." He paused, and the silence that followed was enormous. The numbers are as follows. Trade volume across Council space has declined by 40%. 12 active military conflicts are currently burning in regions formerly stabilized by human peacekeeping forces. Over 200,000 beings on frontier worlds have died from preventable medical emergencies since the closure of human-operated clinics. The Universal Translation System is functioning at 61% accuracy and declining. 47 diplomatic incidents have occurred as a direct result of translation failures. The navigation network is effectively dead in 9 major sectors. He stopped reading. He set down his datapad. He looked out at the chamber. "These are the consequences," he said. "Not of an attack, not of a war. These are the consequences of one species walking away. One species that we told repeatedly and clearly that it did not matter." The chamber erupted. Dozens of representatives shouted at once. Some blamed the humans. Some blamed each other. The translation system, already struggling, garbled several speeches into nonsense, which only proved the point that no one wanted to hear. Counselor Theska was not present. She had been removed from her position 3 weeks earlier, replaced by a younger Pelori representative named Counselor Essara, who had risen to power on a single promise: accountability. Essara now stood and spoke with cold clarity. "The old leadership of this council treated an entire species as a servant class," she said. "We took their labor. We erased their history. We laughed at their ambassador in open session. And when they left, we called them emotional. We owe them an apology. Not because strategy demands it, but because basic decency demands it." Others joined her. One by one, species that had been silent for months found their voices. A representative from a small aquatic species stood and described how human engineers had saved his homeworld from a reactor meltdown 11 years ago. He had tried to thank them officially through the council, and his request had been blocked by the Dreth diplomatic office. He had never spoken about it until now. Another representative, an elderly being from a species of desert nomads, described how a human teacher had lived on his world for 6 years, teaching his people advanced agriculture that doubled their food production. She had asked for nothing in return. When she left with the other humans, she had cried. Story after story came out, hundreds of small kindnesses that had never been recorded, never been thanked, never been acknowledged. The chamber grew quieter with each one. By the end, there was no more shouting. There was only shame. Volmec stood again. What he said next cost him more than anything he had ever done in 3 centuries of politics. "I propose that we send an envoy to Earth to formally request the return of humanity to the Galactic Council. The envoy will carry a full apology and an offer of terms that reflect the true value of their contributions." The vote was taken. It passed almost unanimously. Only War Chief Graxon abstained, sitting in his chair with his massive arms crossed, his pride too great to bend even now. But he did not vote against it. Even he was not that foolish anymore. The council chose Rimmal to lead the envoy. He was the obvious choice. He was the only one who had spoken for humans when it mattered. He accepted the duty without hesitation, and departed for the Sol system within 2 days. The human border patrol met his ship at the edge of Sol space. They were polite, professional, and completely unsurprised. Admiral Yun Nari received him aboard the Bekdu personally. She shook his hand, which was the human greeting, and he noted that her grip was firm, but not hostile. "Counselor Rimmel," she said, "welcome to human space." "Admiral Yun," he replied, "thank you for receiving me." She escorted him to Earth. The journey took 3 days, and during that time, Nari was courteous but measured. She answered his questions about the fleet. She showed him the ship. She did not discuss politics. When he asked her, carefully, how humans felt about the council now, she looked at him for a long time before answering. "We are not angry," she said. "Anger would mean we still expected something from you. We are simply done expecting." Those words stayed with Rimmel for the rest of the journey. On Earth, he was taken to the city of Busan, on the southern coast of the Korean peninsula. Han Do-hoon had returned there after the withdrawal. He was teaching history at a university, living in a small apartment near the sea, and by all appearances, he was at peace. Do-hoon greeted Rimmel warmly. He made tea, a human custom that Rimmel had always found pleasant, and they sat on a balcony overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, and the water was gold and orange, and very beautiful. Rimmel delivered the council's formal apology. He presented the offer: full recognition, committee access, trade equality, historical corrections, everything that should have been given freely 40 years ago. He presented it all honestly, without embellishment, because he respected Do-hoon too much to dress it up. Do-hoon listened to everything. He held his tea in both hands and watched the ocean while Rimmel spoke. When the counselor finished, there was a long silence, filled only by the sound of waves. Then Do-hoon asked one question. "Why did it take a catastrophe for you to treat us as equals?" Rimmel did not have an answer. He thought about lying. He thought about offering a diplomatic explanation about institutional inertia and systemic challenges. But he looked at Do-hoon's face, at the calm, tired, honest eyes of a man who had spent 11 years being humiliated with grace, and he could not lie. "Because we were arrogant," Rimmel said. "Because it was easy to take what you gave, and never question whether we deserved it. Because I myself was silent when I should have spoken, and my silence was its own kind of cruelty. I have no excuse. I can only tell you that I am sorry, and that I mean it, and that meaning it does not undo the harm." Do-hoon nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty," he said. "I will bring the offer to our people. But you must understand, Rimmel, the decision is not mine. Humanity is not one voice. The people will decide for themselves." That evening, Rimmel stood on the balcony alone. Below, in a park beside the sea, human children were playing. They were running and laughing and chasing each other in the fading light. They did not know about the Galactic Council. They did not know about trade collapses or translation failures or the 200,000 dead on frontier worlds. They were just children, playing. Rimmel watched them and felt something crack open inside him. These small, short-lived beings, whose civilization was barely a blip in galactic history, had built half the galaxy's infrastructure out of pure goodwill. They had healed the sick, fed the hungry, kept the peace, and connected the stars. They had done it all without being asked, without being paid, and without being thanked. And they owed the council nothing. Absolutely nothing. He stood there until the stars came out, and the children went home, and the only sound was the ocean, ancient and patient, just like the people who lived beside it. The referendum was announced 3 weeks after Rimmel's visit. Every human citizen on Earth and across the colony worlds would vote on a single question. Should humanity return to the Galactic Council under new terms, or should they remain independent? The debate was immediate and fierce. It filled every news broadcast, every dinner table, every classroom. People argued in markets and on trains, and in late-night messages to friends. The question was simple, but the feelings behind it were not. Many humans did not want to go back. A retired peacekeeper named Cho Min-seo, who had spent 7 years on the Vorath-Kenai border, gave an interview that millions watched. He sat in his kitchen, a quiet man with scarred hands, and said, "I lost friends out there, good people who gave everything to keep strangers safe, and the council erased us from the history books. They said someone else did what we did. I'm not angry anymore. I was angry for a long time, but I am tired now. I just do not want to go back to a place where we have to prove that we are real." Others felt differently. A young engineer named Lee Sora, who had been part of Baek Jinho's team on the relay network, argued passionately for return. "We did not build those systems for the council," she said. "We built them because people needed them. Real people on real worlds who are suffering right now because we left. The council was wrong, but the people who are sick and hungry and lost in the dark did nothing to us. We should not punish them for the arrogance of their leaders." The debate raged for weeks, and in the middle of it, Song Eun-ji gave a speech. She stood in a public hall in Seoul, broadcast live to every human world. She was 30 years old now, no longer the trembling young diplomat who had typed the withdrawal orders. She was steady and clear, and carried herself with a quiet authority that reminded many people of Do-hun. She did not argue for returning. She did not argue for staying away. Instead, she read a list. She read the name of every human doctor who had served on a frontier world without official recognition. She read the name of every engineer who had maintained a relay station that no one thanked them for. She read the name of every soldier who had fought in the border wars and been erased from the record. She read the name of every teacher, every mediator, every aid worker, every quiet, ordinary person who had gone out into the galaxy and done extraordinary things simply because they saw a need and could not walk past it. The list took 47 minutes to read. The hall was silent the entire time. When she finished, Eun-ji looked up from her datapad and said, "Whatever we decide, let it be because of who we are, not because of who they were." The vote was held on a Tuesday. The result came in that evening. 58% in favor of returning, 42% against. It was not a landslide. It was a choice made with open eyes by a people who had been hurt and had decided, carefully and deliberately, to try again. But the return came with conditions. Do-hun and Eun-ji led a team that drafted what became known as the Seoul Accords. 5 terms that were clear, specific, and absolutely non-negotiable. First, humanity would receive full and permanent voting rights on every council committee, with no exceptions and no delays. Second, the galactic record would be formally corrected to credit humanity for all past contributions, including and especially the border wars. Third, an independent oversight body would be created to prevent systemic discrimination against any species, with leadership that rotated among all members. Fourth, any infrastructure that humans built or maintained would be recognized as sovereign human property, lent to the council, not given. If humans built it, humans owned it. Fifth, the Grand Arbiter would deliver a formal public apology in open council session, acknowledging specific wrongs by name. The terms were sent to Aethys Prime. The council reviewed them in a closed session that lasted 14 hours. There was argument. There was resistance. Graxon called the terms humiliating. Rimmel called them fair. Esara, the new Pelori representative, called them generous. In the end, the vote was unanimous. They accepted every term. They had no choice, and most of them knew it. But more than that, Many of them had spent the past year watching their galaxy fall apart, and understanding, for the first time, what humans had been doing all along. The acceptance was not just political. For many, it was personal. The return ceremony was held 30 days later in the Grand Chamber of Aethys Prime. The room was full beyond capacity. Species that had not attended a council session in decades sent representatives. The broken microphone at the human podium had been replaced with a new one. Someone had also moved the podium from the back corner to the front row. Volmek stood first. He was old, visibly diminished by the crisis and the political upheaval that had followed. His 6 eyes were dim. His voice was rough. He read the apology himself, and it was not a polished diplomatic statement. It was halting and uncomfortable and specific. He named the border wars. He named the erasure. He named the insults. He named the laughter in the chamber on the day Do-hun presented his disaster relief proposal. He did not make excuses. He did not dress it up. He simply said what had been done, and that it was wrong. It was the most honest thing he had ever said in 300 years of leadership, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Then Han Do-hun walked to the podium. He wore a simple dark suit. No medals, no symbols of rank. He placed his hand on the console, the same console he had stood behind for 11 years. And he paused. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the station's engines was audible. "We are here," he said, "as equals. Let us begin again." The chamber responded with something that had never happened before in the history of the Galactic Council. Every species, all 300 of them, stood. Not because protocol demanded it, but because the moment demanded it. Admiral Yoon Nari watched the ceremony from the bridge of the Baekdu, orbiting Aethys Prime with a full fleet escort. Her ships were not there as a threat. They were there as a reminder, quiet and steady, that humanity would never again allow itself to be invisible. She watched Do-hun's speech on the main screen, and when he finished, she allowed herself a small, rare smile. Then she turned to Park Tae-ho and said, "Maintain standard orbit, and Tae-ho, keep the fleet sharp. Trust is earned, not declared." Baek Jin-ho was already back at work. His engineering teams had begun reconnecting the navigation network the day after the accords were signed. When they arrived at the first dead relay station, they found something unexpected. A group of Pelori technicians was waiting for them. The Pelori had brought food, local delicacies carefully packed. They introduced themselves by name. They asked about Jinho's family. They asked if they could learn how the relays worked, so that next time they could help maintain them. Jinho stood in the middle of that cold relay station, surrounded by aliens who were looking at him not as a tool or a servant, but as a person. And he smiled for the first time in months. "Yes," he said, "I will teach you. That is all we ever wanted." After the ceremony, Rimmal found Unji in the corridor outside the Grand Chamber. She was standing by a viewport, looking out at the stars, just as Do-hun had done a year ago when he gave the order that changed everything. "The galaxy is better with your kind in it," Rimmal said. Unji looked at him. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something harder and warmer than tears. "It always was," she said. "You just did not notice." Rimmal nodded. He had no argument against the truth. Inside the Grand Chamber, the noise of 300 species filled the ancient room. Debates resumed. Proposals were made. Arguments started and were settled and started again. The human seats were full. The new microphone worked perfectly. And for the first time in the long history of the Galactic Council, the youngest species in the room was also the most respected. Not because they had demanded it, not because they had fought for it, but because they had walked away with dignity, and the galaxy had learned, in their absence, what their presence was truly worth. They had not returned because they were needed. They had returned because they chose to. And that, in the end, made all the difference.